I'm sorry, Henry. The company's going in a leaner direction. The words hung in the air like smoke I couldn't wave away. I stared at Darren Clay, my boss of 7 years, as he signed my termination letter with a steady hand. Beside him stood Cal Brenner, a 26-year-old intern who'd been with the firm for 8 months. He was holding my project folder, the one I'd stayed up 40 nights perfecting. The one that represented 2 years of my life. My throat tightened as I tried to process what was happening. Around us, the conference room felt airless, suffocating. The walls seemed to close in as I watched everything I'd built get handed to someone who barely understood the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition. Darren slid the folder across the table to Cal without even glancing at me. "You'll do great with this," he said to Cal, his voice casual, like he was passing along a lunch order instead of my entire career. Cal nodded, trying to hide his excitement but failing. I noticed he was wearing the tie I'd given him last Christmas, back when I'd been mentoring him, believing I was helping shape someone's future. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask why, to demand some kind of explanation beyond budget cuts. But Darren stood up, smoothing his suit jacket, already dismissing me. "Cal, meet your new lead. Henry can walk you through the basics before he leaves today." The words hit like a physical blow. Before I leave today. Not next week. Not after a transition period. Today. Right now. Cal shifted uncomfortably, finally showing some awareness of how wrong this was. But he didn't say anything. Nobody did. The other 2 managers in the room studied their laptops like they contained the secrets of the universe. I should have seen this coming. The signs had been there for months. Darren keeping me out of certain meetings. Cal suddenly getting assignments that should have been mine. The way Darren would ask Cal his opinion on my designs, undermining my authority in front of the team. But I'd ignored it all, believing loyalty and good work would protect me. My name is Henry Dalton. I'm 44 years old. I was the senior project manager at Clay and Finch Architects. And 5 minutes ago, I learned that 2 decades of dedication meant absolutely nothing. For 2 years, I'd poured everything into the ward redevelopment project. A $4 million contract that would reshape 6 blocks of downtown, bringing affordable housing, green spaces, and commercial development to an area that desperately needed revitalization. I'd spent countless hours working with community groups, navigating city regulations, compromising with stakeholders who all wanted different things. I'd built relationships with contractors, engineers, and city officials. I'd created something I was genuinely proud of, something that would matter beyond just profit margins. And now it was being handed to someone who didn't know a foundation beam from a footer. Cal had talent, sure. He was smart, eager, creative. But he lacked experience. He didn't understand the political complexities of urban development, the delicate balance between cost and quality, the relationships that kept projects moving forward when bureaucracy threatened to stall them. Darren knew this. He had to know this. Which meant this decision wasn't about competence or even cost savings. This was about something else entirely. Control, maybe. Or ego. Or the simple fact that I'd started questioning some of his corner-cutting lately, and he'd decided I was expendable. I was still processing, still trying to form words, when Darren's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted slightly. "It's Evelyn Ward," he said, then looked directly at me as he answered. "Evelyn, good morning." He put the call on speaker. My client. My relationship. The woman I'd spent 2 years building trust with, who'd specifically requested to work with me because she believed in my vision for her community. "Darren, I was hoping to speak with Henry," Evelyn's voice came through clear and professional. "We need to finalize the community input revisions by Friday." Darren's smile was tight. "Actually, Evelyn, Henry's moved on. We're streamlining operations, bringing in fresh perspective. Cal Brenner will be your new point of contact." Silence. Then Evelyn's voice came back, sharper now. Streamlining? Henry built the entire proposal. He knows this project inside and out. Darren forced a laugh that sounded more like a cough. We'll take excellent care of everything. You're in good hands. He ended the call before she could respond. The silence that followed felt like standing in the aftermath of an explosion, ears ringing, surrounded by debris. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I'd seen enough corporate terminations to know that fighting in the moment only gave them ammunition to paint you as difficult or unprofessional. So I stood up slowly, gathered my notepad and pen, and walked toward the door. We'll need you to clear out your desk by end of day, Darren said to my back. Security will escort you. Of course they would. Can't have the fired employee wandering around unsupervised, potentially stealing secrets or sabotaging projects. Never mind that I'd been trusted with millions of dollars in contracts and sensitive client information for years. I walked through the open office space, past cubicles where colleagues pretended to be absorbed in their work. A few met my eyes with sympathy or confusion. Most looked away. My desk was in the corner, overlooking the city. I'd sat there for 7 years, watching the skyline change, watching my projects transform from blueprints to actual buildings. Now I had 30 minutes to pack up my life and leave. My coffee mug with my son's college logo. The framed photo of us at his graduation. My favorite mechanical pencils. A small plant someone had given me as a joke that I'd somehow kept alive for 3 years. All of it fit in one cardboard box. Darren appeared as I was taping it shut. No hard feelings, Henry. It's just business. I couldn't go home yet. I sat in my car in the parking garage for over an hour, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The logical part of my brain understood. Younger employees cost less. They don't question decisions. They're grateful for opportunities and don't have the confidence to push back when something seems wrong. Cal would do whatever Darren asked without the complications of experience or ethics getting in the way. But the emotional part of me, the part that had sacrificed weekends and evenings and time with my son to build something meaningful, couldn't process it. How could 20 years of loyalty be reduced to a budget line item? How could relationships and expertise and institutional knowledge be considered expendable? My laptop pinged with an email notification. Evelyn Ward. The subject line read, "What's going on?" My heart started pounding. I opened it. Henry, I didn't approve this change. I wasn't consulted. Darren promised me faster turnaround with new leadership, but this project needs your experience. What happened? Please call me. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. We met at a coffee shop downtown, away from both our offices. Evelyn was in her 50s, a community organizer who'd spent 15 years fighting for her neighborhood. She'd raised the money for this redevelopment through grants, donations, and sheer force of will. This project meant everything to her. She looked furious. "Tell me the truth," she said the moment I sat down. "What's really happening?" I told her. About the termination, the lack of warning, Cal's sudden promotion. I kept my tone professional, factual. I didn't badmouth Darren or make accusations I couldn't prove. But Evelyn wasn't stupid. She read between the lines. "He's been grooming Cal to take your spot for months, hasn't he?" she said. "Using your blueprints, your strategies, your relationships. And now that the heavy lifting is done, he's cutting costs by replacing you." I nodded. That was exactly what had happened. Darren had waited until the project was approved, funded, and ready to begin construction. The hard part was over. Now all Cal had to do was execute my plans, and Darren could pocket the difference in salary. "I want to rage about this," I admitted. "But that won't help anyone." Evelyn studied me carefully. "What will help?" I took a breath. understanding what happens next. That evening, I went through my personal files from the project. Not company property, just my own notes and records that I'd kept on my laptop. That's when I noticed something interesting. The final compliance sign-off, the document that legally validated the contract and allowed construction to begin, was still under my name. Darren had terminated me mid-process, before the official handover was complete. Without that signature, the contract existed in a kind of legal limbo. The project had been approved, but the final technical authorization, the one that certified the designs met all safety codes and city regulations, hadn't been transferred to Cal yet. Because Cal wasn't certified to provide it. He didn't have the professional engineer's seal required for this type of project. He was an intern, talented but unlicensed. I'd been mentoring him toward eventually getting that certification, but he was years away. Darren had replaced me without thinking through the logistics. Or maybe he had thought it through and assumed I'd just sign off on everything before I left, too professional or too scared to cause problems. He assumed wrong. I didn't plan to sabotage anything. But I also wasn't going to rubber stamp work I couldn't verify. And suddenly, I knew exactly how this would end. Revenge isn't rage. It's patience. The next morning, I sent a carefully worded email to the city's building department. I explained that I'd been terminated from Clay and Finch Architects effective immediately, and that any project documents bearing my professional seal after my termination date should be considered unauthorized. I copied the email to Evelyn and to the firm's compliance officer. It was completely legal and completely devastating. I wasn't blocking the project. I was simply protecting my professional license by making it clear I couldn't be held responsible for work I wasn't supervising. But the implications were obvious. Without a licensed engineer's approval, construction couldn't begin. And finding someone willing to stamp another person's designs without thoroughly reviewing them would take time and money. Darren would need to hire someone new, someone with the credentials Cal lacked. That person would need to review every aspect of my work, verify calculations, check specifications. The project would be delayed by months. I called Evelyn to explain what I'd done and why. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're protecting yourself. And honestly, you're protecting this project too. If something went wrong and your name was still attached, you'd be liable." Exactly. This wasn't revenge. This was professional responsibility. But it would hurt Darren's timeline and his budget. And that felt like justice. Days passed. I started freelancing, taking small contracts with other firms. Nothing major, just enough to pay bills while I figured out my next move. But every morning, I checked the city's building permit website. Public information, freely available to anyone who cared to look. And what I saw was fascinating. Darren's team kept submitting revised plans. Each revision showed cuts, simplifications, cheaper materials. They were trying to reduce costs wherever possible. Thinner support beams. Less expensive concrete specifications. Minimal safety margins. All technically legal, but pushing the boundaries of what was advisable. They were gambling that cheaper would be good enough. I watched this happen and said nothing. I didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. On LinkedIn, Cal posted an excited update, "Thrilled to lead my first major city project. Looking forward to making my mark on the downtown skyline." The post had dozens of likes and congratulatory comments. I almost felt bad for him. He didn't realize he was standing on a trapdoor, waiting for someone to pull the lever. But that wasn't my fault. I hadn't put him in this position. Darren had. 3 weeks after my termination, Evelyn called me directly. Her voice was tense. "Henry, can we meet? I need to clarify some inconsistencies." We met at the same coffee shop. She had printouts of the revised plans, the ones Darren's team had been submitting. She spread them across the table between us. They told me your original design was too expensive, she said. They promised they could deliver the same quality for 15% less. But when I showed these to an independent engineer I know, he had concerns. I looked at the plans. I saw immediately what had changed. Critical safety features reduced or eliminated. Redundancies removed. Everything stripped down to the legal minimum. These aren't the same quality, I said carefully. These are the legal minimum. Your original plans had significant safety margins built in. These don't. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Are they unsafe? I chose my words carefully. They meet code. Barely. But if anything goes wrong during construction, if soil conditions aren't perfect, if materials aren't exactly to specification, if weather causes any complications, there's no buffer. No room for error. Her eyes narrowed. They're gambling with my community's safety. I nodded. They're gambling with your name. If something goes wrong, you're the project sponsor. You'll take the blame. That was all I said. But it was enough. Word started spreading that the ward project was behind schedule. Permits were delayed. The city had questions about the revised plans. Darren blamed the transition period, the learning curve, bureaucratic red tape. Anything except his own poor planning. Cal was working overtime, trying to fix problems he didn't fully understand. I heard through friends still at the firm that he looked exhausted, overwhelmed. Part of me felt sympathy. Cal wasn't the villain here. He was just an ambitious kid who'd accepted an opportunity without understanding the full picture. But sympathy didn't change reality. He was in over his head, and the project was suffering because of it. I kept freelancing, kept building my reputation independently. Several clients I'd worked with in the past reached out directly, asking if I was available for consulting work. Apparently, word had spread about my departure, and people who valued experience over cheap labor were interested. One afternoon, my phone rang. Darren. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Henry. He said, his voice tight with forced friendliness. I hear you've been talking to Evelyn Ward. I kept my tone neutral. She reached out to me. I've been honest with her about my concerns. Just don't interfere with the project, he said, the threat barely concealed. I won't, I replied. I already did my part. Unless you forgot that. I hung up before he could respond. That felt like a small victory. A month after my termination, Evelyn's legal team began a formal audit of the project. They'd noticed discrepancies between the original plans I'd designed and the revised versions Darren's team kept submitting. They wanted to understand why costs kept dropping but timelines kept extending. I heard about it through my network. Apparently, Darren was panicking. He'd started deleting old emails, trying to erase the paper trail that showed him personally ordering the cost-cutting measures. But corporate servers keep everything. And more importantly, I'd kept my own records. When Evelyn's lawyer contacted me for an interview, I brought copies of every original plan, every email exchange, every meeting note. I didn't have to embellish or exaggerate. I just presented facts. These were the original specifications I designed, I explained, laying out the documents. These are what Mr. Clay's team submitted after my departure. You can see the changes for yourself. The lawyer studied the papers for a long time, making notes. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Dalton, in your professional opinion, do these revisions maintain the structural integrity of the original design? I met her eyes. In my professional opinion, they meet the legal minimum standards. But they eliminate safety margins I considered essential for a project of this scope in this location. She nodded slowly, writing that down word for word. The audit results came back 2 weeks later. Evelyn forwarded me a copy. One sentence stood out: structural changes proposed without original author's consent or professional oversight. That phrase was corporate poison. It meant liability, potential lawsuits, professional violations. It meant that Darren had modified plans bearing my professional seal without authorization. That was a serious ethical breach, possibly even illegal depending on how the state licensing board interpreted it. I replied to Evelyn with just 3 words, "Good luck with everything." I meant it sincerely. She'd put her heart into this project. She deserved better than what Darren had given her. Within days, things started moving fast. The firm's investors, the ones who'd put up matching funds for the project, suddenly got very interested in the audit findings. They froze additional funding pending a complete review. Darren was seen pacing the hallways at Clay and Finch, phone pressed to his ear, having increasingly desperate conversations. Cal quietly updated his LinkedIn to say he was seeking new opportunities. The company group chat, usually busy with project updates and office banter, went silent. People were nervous. Jobs were on the line. And everyone knew why. This wasn't just a project delay anymore. This was a potential catastrophe that could sink the entire firm. On a Tuesday morning in October, Evelyn Ward's development company issued a press release. I was drinking coffee, scrolling through news on my phone, when I saw it. Ward Community Development terminates contract with Clay and Finch Architects, effective immediately, citing integrity concerns and unauthorized modifications to approved plans. $4 million. Gone overnight. I set down my coffee and read the release 3 times. It was professionally worded, careful to avoid specific accusations that might trigger defamation lawsuits. But the message was clear: Darren's firm had violated the trust that made the contract possible. I felt something then. Not quite satisfaction, not quite vindication. Something quieter. Relief, maybe. The truth had come out. Not because I'd launched some aggressive campaign against my former employer, but because I'd simply protected my professional integrity and let reality do the rest. My phone started buzzing with texts from former colleagues. Did you see? This is insane. Darren's office is empty. I didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing to say. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I'd won some kind of battle, but because the truth had mattered. Because cutting corners and replacing experience with cheap labor had consequences. Because sometimes, rarely, justice actually happens. By Monday, Darren's name was gone from the company directory. The official word from HR was leadership transition pending, which was corporate speak for fired. The board issued a statement about integrity and values, all the usual language companies use when they're trying to distance themselves from scandal. But the damage was deeper than just one executive. The Ward project had been the firm's flagship contract, the one they'd used to attract other clients and investors. With it terminated and the reasons public, other clients started asking questions. Confidence evaporated. Within 2 weeks, 3 other major contracts were put on hold for review. The firm's stock price dropped. Layoffs were rumored. I watched this happen from a distance, not with glee but with a kind of sad recognition. This was what happened when you valued profit over people, when you treated employees as interchangeable parts instead of human beings with knowledge and relationships and dignity. Darren had spent years climbing the corporate ladder. He'd been smart, ambitious, well-connected. But he'd built everything on a foundation of shortcuts and exploitation. And now that foundation was crumbling beneath him. The ladder was folding. And there was nobody left to catch him. 2 days after the contract termination, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. Henry Dalton. The voice was professional, warm. This is Evelyn Ward. Do you have time to talk? We met at her office the next morning. She had coffee waiting, good coffee, not the weak corporate stuff. She got straight to the point. Henry, I want to finish what we started. The community still needs this project. The funding is still there. But I need someone I can trust to do it right. My heart started beating faster. What are you proposing? She slid a folder across her desk. I've partnered with Sterling and Associates, one of Clay and Finch's competitors. They're willing to take on the project using your original plans. And they want you to lead it. I opened the folder. The contract terms were generous. Senior Project Director. Full creative control. Double my old salary. Profit sharing on successful completion. It was everything I'd lost, returned with interest. You'd have complete authority, Evelyn continued. No one second-guessing your decisions, no pressure to cut corners. We build this right, or we don't build it at all. I looked at her carefully. Why me? You could get someone without all the baggage from the Clay and Finch situation. She smiled. Because you walked away from that firm rather than compromise your integrity. That's exactly who I want building something in my community. I accepted the offer. Walking back into the city planning office under a Sterling and Associates badge felt surreal. The same security guard who'd seen me coming and going for 2 years did a double take. Mr. Dalton? I thought you were, he trailed off, unsure how to finish. I came back, I said simply. Stronger. He grinned. Good for you, sir. Good for you. I spent my first week at Sterling meeting with my new team. Small, efficient, experienced. No egos, no politics. People who actually cared about doing quality work. We reviewed the original ward plans together, discussing what worked and what could be improved. They treated my designs with respect, offered thoughtful suggestions, collaborated instead of competing. It felt like remembering what work was supposed to feel like. Evelyn scheduled a press conference to announce the partnership. The ward redevelopment project will proceed under new leadership, she told reporters. We're committed to building something that will serve this community for generations, not just meeting minimum requirements. A reporter asked about Clay and Finch. Evelyn's response was diplomatic but firm. We're focused on moving forward with partners who share our values. That afternoon, I received an email from Cal, brief, apologetic. He'd resigned from Clay and Finch and was going back to school to finish his certifications properly. I'm sorry I was part of what happened to you, he wrote. I should have known better. I appreciated that. Growth required recognizing mistakes. 3 months into the new contract, news broke that Clay and Finch Architects had filed for bankruptcy. The ward project termination had triggered a cascade. Investors had pulled out. Other clients had abandoned ship. The firm's reputation, built over 20 years, had collapsed in less than 6 months. I read the articles with a strange mixture of emotions. I'd worked there for 7 years. I'd built relationships, completed projects I was proud of. Seeing it all fall apart wasn't satisfying. It was just sad. But the firm's collapse wasn't my doing. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply protected my professional integrity and told the truth when asked. Everything else, all the consequences, had been Darren's choices catching up with him. He'd prioritized profit over safety. He'd treated people as disposable. He'd cut corners and assumed no one would notice or care. And when reality contradicted those assumptions, he'd lost everything. The business news sites ran profiles about corporate ethics and the cost of short-term thinking. Darren's name appeared in headlines, not as a successful executive, but as a cautionary tale about greed and mismanagement. His professional license was under investigation. His LinkedIn showed he was consulting independently, which usually meant unemployed. The same city that had once shaken his hand and praised his firm now wanted nothing to do with him. And I'd never had to say a single negative word about him publicly. The ward redevelopment project broke ground on a cold November morning. Media crews showed up. City officials gave speeches. Evelyn stood beside me as cameras flashed, both of us wearing hard hats, holding ceremonial shovels. A reporter asked me about the project's history, the problems with the previous firm. I kept my answer brief and professional. Every project has challenges. What matters is building something that will serve this community with integrity and quality. That's what we're focused on now. After the ceremony, Evelyn pulled me aside. Thank you for not trashing Darren publicly. You could have. You'd have been justified. But you took the high road. I shrugged. Bitterness doesn't build anything useful. The work speaks for itself. And it did. Over the next months, the project progressed smoothly. We came in on schedule and under budget, not by cutting corners but by proper planning and experienced management. The community groups Evelyn worked with praised our responsiveness and transparency. Local news ran positive stories about development done right. My name was engraved on the project cornerstone, Henry Dalton, Senior Project Director. A permanent reminder that integrity and experience mattered. That people weren't disposable. That doing things right, even when it was harder and more expensive in the short term, paid off in the long run. 6 months after breaking ground, I was invited to speak at a professional conference about project management and ethics. The auditorium was packed with architects, engineers, and developers. I told my story honestly. The termination, the replacement, the choice I'd faced between staying silent and protecting my professional integrity. I didn't name Darren or Clay and Finch specifically. I didn't need to. The lessons were universal. Sometimes you'll be pressured to compromise, I told the audience. To sign off on work you haven't verified, to cut corners that seem small but matter enormously, to prioritize cost over quality. And when you refuse, there might be consequences. You might lose your job. You might lose relationships. But you won't lose yourself. The applause was sustained and genuine. Afterward, dozens of people approached me with business cards, speaking opportunities, consulting requests. My inbox filled with emails from people thanking me for articulating struggles they'd faced in their own careers. I'd become something I never intended, a voice for professional integrity in an industry that often prioritized profit over principle. And that felt more valuable than any title or salary I'd ever had at Clay and Finch. A year after my termination, the Ward project reached completion. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds of community members. Families walked through the new affordable housing units, marveling at the quality and attention to detail. Children played in the green space we designed with input from local residents. Small business owners prepared to open shops in the ground floor commercial spaces. Evelyn gave a speech thanking everyone who'd contributed. When she got to my name, she paused. Henry Dalton didn't just design buildings. He designed hope. He showed us that doing things right, even when it's difficult, even when it costs more in the short term, creates something that lasts. I stood there, uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the recognition. This was what I'd envisioned 2 years ago when I first started working on this project. Not just buildings, but community. Not just profit, but purpose. After the ceremony, I walked through the development alone, taking it all in. Families were already moving into apartments. A coffee shop was setting up equipment. Kids were testing out the playground equipment. This existed because I'd refused to compromise. Because I'd protected my integrity even when it cost me everything. And that was worth more than any corporate title. On my way home from the dedication ceremony, I drove past my old office building. The Clay and Finch Architects sign was gone. Movers were loading furniture into trucks. The space was being cleared for new tenants. I pulled over and sat there for a moment, watching. Not to gloat, not to feel superior, just to acknowledge what had happened. A chapter had closed. For me, for Darren, for everyone who'd been part of that company. I thought about calling Darren, maybe offering some kind of reconciliation or closure. But what would I say? I didn't hate him. I didn't even feel particularly angry anymore. I just felt distant, like he was a character in a story I'd moved past. So I sat there in silence, watching movers carry out desks and filing cabinets, watching the physical evidence of a company disappear. Then I started my car and drove away. I had my own office to get to, my own projects to manage, my own future to build. The past was behind me. And for the first time in a year, that felt completely okay. My son called that evening to congratulate me on the project completion. He'd followed the whole story, from my termination to the contract termination to the successful rebuild. "I'm proud of you, Dad," he said. "Not just for the project, but for how you handled everything. You could have been bitter. You could have burned bridges. But you stayed professional." Those words meant more than any award or recognition. I'd worried that losing my job, going through months of uncertainty, would make me seem weak or unsuccessful in his eyes. Instead, he'd seen something different. Integrity under pressure. Resilience without bitterness. "Thanks, buddy," I said, my throat tight with emotion. "That means a lot." After we hung up, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the sunset. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the struggle, the slow rebuild. The temptation to lash out that I'd resisted. The choice to focus on doing good work instead of seeking revenge. Darren had replaced me to save money, to increase profit margins, to simplify his operations. And in doing so, he'd lost everything. Not because I'd destroyed him, but because he'd destroyed himself. His own shortcuts, his own greed, his own lack of integrity had been his downfall. I just refused to go down with him. Months later, Sterling and Associates offered me a partnership. My name would join theirs on the door. It was recognition not just of my work on the Ward project, but of the clients and reputation I'd brought with me. I accepted, knowing this was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not at a firm that valued cost-cutting over quality, but at one that understood integrity was its own form of profit. One afternoon, I was working late when I saw a familiar figure outside the building. Darren. He looked older, tired, worn down by whatever his life had become. I watched him through the window for a moment, wondering if he'd come to apologize or confront me or just see what I'd built from the ruins of his betrayal. But he didn't come inside. He just stood there for a minute, staring at the building, then walked away. I never saw him again. And I realized I didn't need to. The best revenge wasn't destroying him or gloating over his failures. The best revenge was building something honest and successful while he watched from the outside. It was proving that integrity wasn't just idealistic nonsense but a foundation strong enough to build a career on. He'd replaced me with a cheaper hire, thinking experience was dispensable and loyalty was weakness. And the $4 million contract terminated overnight because arrogance always has a cost. I whispered to the empty office, sometimes the best revenge is letting arrogance burn itself down, and building something honest from the ashes. Then I turned off the lights and went home.